if you think about traditional leadership or high-level leadership, in other words, a high-level leader has a lot of influence over the people that they work with. Influence creates this abnormal life circumstance, the busyness of it, the pace of it, the hustle of it, the stress, the pressure. That creates abnormal life circumstances that the rest of the world doesn't necessarily deal with. Right. Abnormal life circumstances create high levels of stress. Unaddressed stress creates loneliness, anxiety, depression, addictions, broken relationships, burnout, etc., all of which kill creativity, connection, and all the core components that made you the leader to begin with. So in essence, the more success you get, your kryptonite, the ability to connect, see people, read people, lead people, you signed up for a career that in some ways is designed to kill it. Right. That's the dilemma of leaders as I know it. But the interesting thing is it's only a dilemma when you don't know about it. Right. And so when I hire young leaders now, millennials, I tell them up front, the more success you get, the more pressure you're going to feel, the more stress you're going to experience. Right. And if we don't have healthy outlets to offload stress, we'll compound it, and that's when it turns into things that become crisis-oriented. Prior to, I think we need to shift the invitation to not something that people need, but it's something that everybody deserves. Yes. So if you could just honestly hear that, because most of you out there are going to tune it out when you hear there's the counselor guy talking about leadership, because I don't need him until the wheels are falling off. Right. And again, not something we need, something we all deserve. Right. And it's amazing right now the number of people from around the world that are coming to our spot at Onsite to do a therapeutic deep dive when things could not be better. Things are going really well. They just want to raise their EQ and become better at what they do. Right.
Well, and identify things that it's kind of like, I remember going to the chiropractor for the first time years and years ago. And he would say, well, just because you're not experiencing pain in an area doesn't mean it's not jacked up. You know what I mean? Like, pain's not always the indicator. It's going to flare up maybe next week. You lean down to put your sock on, boom, all of a sudden your back's gone. What? It wasn't hurting. That kind of thing. And I think that's really, really good what you just said. I think that's good for all of us. So the question becomes, what would you say to leaders? They're going, okay, I want to do this. Are they trying to find a local counselor in the area? Are there resources that you provide where they can go, all right, let me just kind of take a health check, because that's what I'm wondering, because it doesn't always have to be, like you said, the crisis, but that this is just, hey, let me make sure that I'm healthy in every area. Well, how do they start that process?
Well, if you think about it, we take our car into the shop for a tune-up, and I think we need to treat ourselves and our leadership skills the same way. We need to be tuned up and be emotionally fit in order to be able to sustain what we're offering the people, because we pour out, and we need an opportunity to be poured into. What I like about our option is it fits a really busy person who's wired for success and is driven to create, because we can give them 4 untethered days where you can do about a year's worth of counseling in a few days. Oh, wow. And that's the kind of thing, I like that. I like intense learning. And give it to me in a big dose like a fire hose so I can take it and go apply it. Yeah, that's a little bit of our model. But to answer your question beyond our resource, there are so many options. It can be, and it doesn't always have to be counseling. I think we need to humanize the counseling experience and create. High-impact leaders, I believe, should sit in as many circles as they stand on stages. And the stages being metaphorical. Some people speak for a living, but your stage is your influence.
That's right.
There needs to be a small group of people who know you beyond what you do. And you can create that with a friend circle, with a small group, and that needs to happen. Honestly, I think it needs to happen once a week is optimal. And that's not always possible if you got a busy family and a busy career, but at least a couple times a month. That you're finding somebody that feels safe for you to say the unsaid and speak truth to. That alone can lower your ambient stress level and go a long way.
Oh, that's good. Well, I was going to ask you, besides that, what are some healthy ways that leaders can relieve stress?
Exercise is a big one. A lot of these are going to be simple that you've heard of before, but just personal time and self-care. But I like to go beyond the surface stuff and have you take a little bit deeper dive. One of the things that I use is something called, and don't let the title scare you away, it's called an emotional body scan, which is something I do when I'm battling the nerves, the pressure, the stress of a of a high stress circumstance. I'm walking into a meeting, I'm speaking to a big audience, heading into my finance partners to talk about the next stage of growth, all the things that keep me up at night. Then I simply need to identify, clarify, and then offload whatever emotion is coming up to me at the time. And so what that could look like right now, if I were, you okay if I do it in real time?
Yeah, this is good for people because they're going to plug in their own situation.
Yeah. So right now, this is a big podcast. I know it's been really successful, EntreLeadership, and I respect it, and as do a lot of people. So if I were to check in, I've got some nerves about what I'm saying and how it's going to translate. And that's okay. Historically, I would have thought if I said that out loud on the very thing that I'm being interviewed on, that would somehow present a weakness that would show me not as credible. And I actually feel like it makes me more in tune and stronger because I can be vulnerable about what I feel like is a strength, not a weakness. It's not just this, though, is I've got a live recording of my own podcast coming up in 2 hours. So I'm thinking about both of those things. And if I were to check in right now, my anxiety is about at a 4 out of 10. It usually sits right in my chest. And so you see what I did there. I named an emotion. I ranked it between 1 and 10, and I actually identified where it is in my body. That's called an emotional body scan. If you can do that, if you can identify, clarify, and then offload, your stress actually goes down. That's a simple trick and technique that professional athletes use, that a lot of people use to simply find out what's actually going on beneath the surface.
How did you offload it? I get the identify and clarify. How did you offload?
Because I shared it with you.
Okay. So the public sharing, got it.
Or with somebody. I mean, it doesn't have to be necessarily public.
Well,
I did that because
I just mean you got it out of your head.
Yeah, I'm more used to it. But the fact that one other person now knows that, it's not
That's great. I love it. I just was making, that's really, really good. Because if I think back to that, I go, I don't know that I've ever truly even thought about where I'm feeling it.
Most haven't.
Because I think we move so fast, right? And it's just kind of rolling and rattling around in your head. I think it's a good exercise for me to actually go, where in my body am I feeling this?
And that seems like an odd thing to explore, but actually most leaders aren't even emotionally literate. We don't even, you wouldn't know a feeling if it hits you in the head. And so, not you, but I'm just saying in general.
I know what you're saying. Yeah, sure.
Is a lot of times it's just not a language that we use every day. But when we get emotionally literate, we're able to, because the enemy of emotion is when things aren't clear, when we don't know what we're feeling. And most of us don't. If I were just to say to the random person, what are you feeling? If we're not used to the 7 core emotions, then we're searching, and we're good at telling you what we think about what we feel, but we're accessing the wrong part of the brain. We really need to be in a part of the brain where we actually hold stress so that we can kind of move it.
That's good. Okay. So while you were describing that, I wrote it down right here on the paper. I'm going to come up with a leadership scenario. I think this is going to hit home, but you were identifying, clarifying, and unloading to me on anxiety about doing an interview. We've got leaders that are listening in, and on a daily, if not hourly basis, they're with team members, some who are obviously lower rank than them. So they're looked at as you're the leader, and these people are followers. They're looking up at you, and you're in a situation where you may be uncertain about something, or something you stuck your neck out on the line for. You believed in this, or this is a new product line, or this is a new initiative, or whatever it is. And we're too early to know how it's really going to end up. Maybe I'm just making this up, but you're uncertain. The point is, as the leader, you're feeling some anxiety, at least, of uncertainty. And is it healthy in this situation, even with that team? You're all together. You're all invested. We all know the numbers. It's not, whatever it is. Is it okay for the leader to say, hey, I just need to tell you all, or to show some vulnerability? Is that misguided there? Is that something, is that not the right environment to show a little bit of uncertainty sometimes?
I am a firm believer that it's the right environment. However, if you're vulnerable in front of a team of people who you've never modeled that to before, and it's not a cultural norm, then it's going to be very uncomfortable. Because what you need to be vulnerable is something called psychological safety, which is the number one factor that builds trust. And if leaders don't know that, then how do you actually build trust? But being honest is one of the big ones. I dream of the day that our political leaders could say, and I don't know.
Yeah.
Because we all know they don't. There's no way, especially if you look at our presidential candidates when they debate and you're getting asked all these things about foreign policy, and people who don't live in that world, there's no way to have experience across the whole spectrum.
No.
But if I've never seen one to this date say, you know what, I don't know. I've got a really smart team that I've hired to help me with healthcare.
That's right. Yeah.
They got my
Wouldn't it
vote.
be great?
I'd trust
well,
it.
you know, we're going to have a great national security advisor. We're going to have the best Joint Chiefs of Staff. We're going to just say that.
Well, we've always assumed that plants a seed of doubt in the viewer or the voter in that case.
But it actually creates trust, yes?
Creates trust.
It's a complete 180.
It's a 180. Wow. And that's what's fun is we're kind of waking up to that. But it can't just be an individual shift. It has to be a cultural shift to be embraced. Just as I would say, if you're going to take the time to share your struggle and your stress with another person, you need to make sure that person has the bandwidth to be able to listen and not try to fix, and that they've got enough empathy and emotional intelligence on board that they're going to be a good sounding board for you. Because you can tell your truth to unsafe people, they're likely not going to respond appropriately. And if you're sharing or revealing a pretty big trauma, let's just take it more on the therapeutic side, and often the response you get can be as traumatic as the trauma itself if people aren't positioned to hear it. Now, I give you an extreme circumstance if that was like sexual abuse or something like that, and let's say you share that with a parent and they don't believe it. That can be harder than recovering from the abuse itself 20 years later when they come see us. We're undoing that emotion. So I would say, as it relates to leaders, if you're speaking to your company the first time, you want to be careful taking those risks too soon. If you've never been vulnerable in front of your staff and you suddenly decide this is a good idea and you step up and be like, boom, here's everything you've never heard about me.
It's going to be crickets.
It's going to be crickets, and it may make you revert.
Right.
So I think pace it appropriately and warm people up to the idea of speaking truth.
Good. Okay, good. Love that.